Let us give a big welcome to Dr. Bruce Daggy again. Come on.
All right, thank you. I'm glad you were able to get back from lunch so quickly and join me now for a further discussion on heart health. Yesterday, we introduced Phytocol ST. Today, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about what you can do to protect the health of your heart. And I talked a bit yesterday about the burden of heart disease and how it's a problem here in Malaysia and also a problem around the world. It is the top cause of death around the globe. Every 26 seconds, someone has a coronary event, and almost half of the time, it's a fatal event. Once every minute around the world, someone dies from a coronary event. So this is the leading cause of death. It's a problem here, it's a problem in the United States, it's a problem everywhere that we want to do something about. I showed this yesterday from Malaysia, again, leading cause of death in Malaysia. Long before Dr. Shaklee, there was this philosophy, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And it's a very wise expression. What we eat every day, what we put into our bodies every day makes a big difference in our long-term health, in our short-term and our long-term health, but certainly in our long-term health. But there is a problem. It depends on the nature of the food that you're putting into your body. Today, we have modern diets that too often leave us with no energy and with nutritional deficiencies as well as excesses, right? Too many calories, but not quality calories. The problem starts on the farm. There are challenges to our food supply with our agriculture. In some cases, depletion of the land or growing food for yield, but not necessarily for nutrition. Foods that may look like the food that we had 30 or 50 years ago, but it is not as nutritious today. And often, the food that we eat has to be transported long distances, and it can lose nutritional value as it is being transported, or it gets heavily processed and loses nutritional value. So the problem starts right there at the farm. And then there's our choices of food. You know, we've moved away, many of us, from traditional diets that were rich in vitamins and minerals and fiber, and we've moved into a lot of fried food. And as I said yesterday, you can easily get 2 or 3 times the cholesterol in your diet every day. That is the maximum amount that's recommended. But then you're also getting that with saturated fat, with trans fat, with a lot of sodium, which can raise your blood pressure, and other ingredients that just aren't good for your health. So it's the quality and it's the amount. When Malaysians are asked how they're doing, you're a pretty honest group, I think, as a whole. You admit, right, that your diets are not as good as they could be, as they should be. You're not getting the recommended amounts of fruit and vegetable. It's exactly the same in the United States. It's the same everywhere that I've been. About 3/4 of Malaysians saying they don't meet the dietary guidelines. It's hard to eat right. It's hard to eat right. It's hard to do it consistently. It's hard to do it with the lives that we live. So that's about 9 million Malaysians between the age of 25 and 64 are saying that they didn't meet the dietary guidelines. And then we have other problems. Food is a big problem, but the stress in our lives, and too many of us are still smoking, and we're exposed to toxins everywhere. These are also challenges to our body that our bodies have to overcome to stay healthy. But I really want to focus on diet. These other problems like smoking we need to do something about, but I want to focus on diet. Why does diet make a difference to our heart health? What specifically in the diet is either bad or good for our hearts? What do we know? What does the science teach us? I quoted this statement from the American Heart Association yesterday, that the food that you eat and the amount of food that you eat can affect many controllable risk factors for heart disease, including your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your risk of diabetes, and your risk of being overweight. So that's a given. That's a very well accepted principle of what the science teaches us. If we talk about overweight, obesity, one thing you can do here is go to a Shaklee center and sit down with a nutritionist and learn what your body mass index, or BMI, is. Most of you probably know. BMI is an estimate of whether or not you have too much body fat. It's based on your height and your weight. And you want your BMI to be within a healthy range, and for many of us, that's not the case. If you combine the BMI with the waist circumference, you actually get a better idea of what's going on. There are some people that have a somewhat high BMI because they're very muscular. And then they'll have a small waist. Their BMI number might be high, but it doesn't mean they have a problem with body fat. It just means that they're very strong. Young Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Didn't have much body fat. Olympic athletes usually don't have very much body fat, but they might have a high BMI. But if you have a high BMI and a big waistline, there's not much question you're at increased risk of cardiovascular disease and of diabetes and many other conditions that are driven by weight. So getting to an ideal body weight makes a big difference for your heart health and for your overall health. And we have a problem again here in Malaysia, again, just as in the United States and other countries around the world, where there are a lot of people who are overweight or obese. And overweight means up to about 30 pounds above ideal weight, and then obesity starts above that. And so a very high proportion of us are at risk based on our body weight. Now, when we talk specifically about what it is in our food that affects our cardiovascular health, there are things that we know from clinical research put our cardiovascular health at risk, and things that we know are protective. I talked yesterday about cholesterol. I just mentioned saturated fat, trans fat, sodium, and simply too many calories. These are some of the factors that put your cardiovascular system in danger. But there are a number of ingredients in foods that are protective. Yesterday I talked about plant sterols and plant stanols. That's a great example. There's also fish oil. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. The omega-3 fatty acids are good for your heart in very many ways. CoQ10 is an important antioxidant that's protective of your heart. Soy protein, which is found in cinch and in ESP. There's a heart health claim in the United States for soy protein if you're getting enough in the day. And soluble fiber, the kind of fiber that's often found in fruit and in some vegetables, is also good for your heart because it tends to lower your cholesterol. So those are just some examples of things that we know are in our food, that if we're making the right choices of food and supplementing wisely, we can take to lower our risk of heart disease. So let me now talk about the Shaklee products we have here for heart health, specifically these three: Phytocol ST, which we launched yesterday, Omega Guard, and CoQ Health. And I'm going to start with CoQ Health. So here it is, CoQ Health Plus. And the key ingredient in CoQ Health Plus is called coenzyme Q10, or CoQ10. Again, an important antioxidant that protects your heart. I've had conversations with some of you in the last day where the subject of statin drugs has come up. Some of you have been prescribed by your doctors to take a statin drug. It's the main pharmaceutical treatment used around the world to lower cholesterol. It lowers the bad cholesterol, and it does that very well. But perhaps surprisingly, when you take a statin drug, another thing that it does is it lowers your CoQ10. Now, it doesn't seem to make sense, does it, that something that you're taking to protect your heart is going to lower CoQ10, which is something that protects your heart. But that's the way it is, and we know why this is. Let me see if this illustration will work. So, oh, it's not coming up quite right. I'm sorry, this may not work. I'll just have to talk you through it. Your body makes cholesterol, and as I said yesterday, can make all of the cholesterol that it needs from a little molecule called acetate, and it's many, many steps in that synthesis. So imagine there's acetate on this side, and there's cholesterol on that side. And when pharmaceutical scientists were trying to find a way to lower cholesterol, they tried blocking one of the later steps in the conversion of acetate to cholesterol. But it turned out that wasn't a good idea because it was toxic. The accumulation of the later stage intermediates between acetate and cholesterol was toxic. So that was not a good way to make a drug. So they went back towards the start of that pathway, and they blocked a very early step in the conversion of acetate to cholesterol. And that turned out to work very well to lower cholesterol, and it was relatively safe. And this is what the statin drugs do. They block a very early step in the conversion of acetate to cholesterol. But the problem is, and let's see if this will work. No, it's not working, so I'll have to describe it further. The problem is, after this early step that the statin drugs block, there's a branch pathway, and it's on that branch pathway that CoQ10 is made. So the pharmaceutical agents are designed to block cholesterol, but it turns out they're also blocking the synthesis of CoQ10 by your body. So your CoQ10 levels go down. Okay? So your CoQ10 levels also tend to go down as you get older. So if you were recommended by your doctor to take a statin, one thing you might want to ask is, would it be okay if I also took something that provided me with some CoQ10? Because we know from clinical studies that you can take CoQ10 in supplement form, and it will bring your CoQ10 levels back up to what they were before you were taking the statin. We don't know for sure that that will protect against the side effects of statins, and there are some serious side effects of statins, but we do know for sure that it will bring your CoQ10 levels back up, and that CoQ10 is something that protects your heart. So I would strongly recommend you talk to your doctor. If you're on a statin, or you may be going on a statin, ask the question, could I also take CoQ10 with that? Sorry that slide didn't work. It was a complicated slide for a complicated story. Omega Guard. Let me talk about Omega Guard. I mentioned yesterday that fish oil was one of the first things I worked on when I was studying nutrition. There were studies going back to the 1960s and 1970s looking at Greenland Eskimos, people in the far north who ate a lot of high-fat food, a lot of food from fish and from whales, and yet they had very little heart disease. Very little heart disease. And it was a paradox. How could they be eating all this fat and all this saturated fat and cholesterol, but they had very little heart disease? And one of the things the doctors noticed when they would take blood samples from these Greenland Eskimos is that their blood took a long time to clot. Their blood was what we call thin. And they thought, well, maybe that's why they don't have heart disease. Because remember I talked yesterday about blood clots forming and that being part of having a heart attack? These Eskimos had very thin blood, and they said maybe there's something to that. So that started this whole area of research on omega-3s and heart health. That was the first idea, and a very interesting idea it is. And we now have 50 or so years of research on omega-3s and heart health. And we've seen in studies that consumption of omega-3, either from eating a lot of fish or from taking supplements, is associated with reduced death from all causes, and also specifically reduced death from cardiovascular disease. So a very strong finding. A lot of times, pharmaceutical agents can't show that they're reducing death or reducing death from cardiovascular disease, but we have this data for omega-3. And we now have many, many studies showing different ways that omega-3 fatty acids may benefit your heart. They help support a normal heart rate. They help maintain blood flow through the coronary arteries that nourish the heart. They reduce triglyceride levels. This is another risk factor for heart disease, is having very high triglyceride levels. That's another number that you should know. And omega-3s lower that. And they also help lower or maintain healthy blood pressure levels. So many different reasons have been found. They also tend to be anti-inflammatory, and inflammation is thought to be part of cardiovascular disease as well. So there are many, many reasons that could explain why omega-3 is good for your heart. I also want to say that omega-3 is good for a lot of other things too. We talk about omega-3 in children, in developing children, and young children. Omega-3 fatty acids, the EPA and DHA that are found in fish oil, are now routinely added to infant formula because a growing baby needs a lot of omega-3 for the brain and for the retina. And so omega-3 is found in mother's milk, but it didn't used to be found in infant formula. And finally, that began to change a few years ago, and now in most cases, infant formula will have omega-3. Your baby's brain has a lot of DHA, and so does yours for that matter, and it takes a while to accumulate it. So without that omega-3 in the diet, then it can slow down the development of the brain and the retina. So you want to give your child a good start. You can start, if you're a mother-to-be, by making sure that you're taking omega-3, because some of that will go to your baby, and that's a very good thing. Omega-3 is also good for things like joint function. So there are many, many benefits, and Omega Guard is something that I take every day, and I recommend to anybody. There's so many health benefits from having a little bit more omega-3 in your diet. Even if you eat a lot of fish, omega-3, making sure you have omega-3 is a very good thing. You want to take it with meals. That will help with the absorption. Doesn't have to be a huge meal, but take it with meals. You could take 2 servings at one time. It'll be absorbed well. Just take it with a meal, okay? Interestingly, the most omega-3 is found in cold water fish. And the reason for that is it's a little bit like an antifreeze for the fish. It sits in the cell membranes of the fish and helps keep those membranes from freezing, from getting stiff. It helps keep them fluid. And so fish that are in tropical waters usually don't have as much omega-3 as fish that are from cold water. You don't always know where your fish are from. Your fish could be wild ocean-caught fish. They could be farm-raised fish. You don't always know. How much omega-3 do you need? Well, if you think you're pretty healthy, you don't know that you have any issues, and you just want to have a baseline amount of omega-3, then most authorities would say you need about 0.3 to 0.5 grams a day, 300 to 500 milligrams a day of these, what are these fish oil omega-3s, the EPA plus DHA. Okay? That's a good baseline amount. That's like brushing your teeth twice a day. That's just a baseline amount. That's not necessarily the optimal amount, but it's a good start. If you think you're at risk, if you know you're at risk, if your doctor has said, you need to do more steps to look after your heart, then most authorities recommend a higher level, 2 times or 3 times higher than that, about 1,000 milligrams a day, instead of just the 300 to 500 as the good amount. For some people who have elevated triglycerides, they'll recommend even more, several grams a day. But for many people, myself included, I would say about 1 gram a day is a good level to protect your heart, about 1,000 milligrams a day. There is a bit of a fishy dilemma, and I mentioned yesterday pollution in the environment. We worry sometimes that the fish that we eat might be contaminated from things that we put into the ocean, heavy metals like mercury and lead, PCBs, dioxins. There's still DDT in the environment after all these years, and these contaminants will tend to accumulate in the fatty tissue of the fish. They will accumulate in the oil in the fish. And so it's more and more of a problem, particularly if you're eating fish that are at the top of the food chain, swordfish, big tuna, things like that. These fish will have eaten the smaller fish, and they're accumulating all of the contaminants that the smaller fish ate, and so they can be particularly contaminated. So it's a worry for us a bit that while eating fish is good for you, you could have a problem. And in fact, in many countries, the health authorities will advise pregnant women not to have fish more than twice a week because of the concern of what might be in the fish, the contaminants might be in the fish. So you need to eat the fish for your baby, but you don't want to eat too much fish because of the possibility that the fish is contaminated. So what can we do? Well, at Shaklee, what we do is we add a purification step, and then we test as well to make sure that the omega-3 is clean. The purification process that we use is called molecular distillation, and it's done at a low temperature so that it doesn't cause the omega-3s to break down. You want to make sure that they stay in their fresh and natural state. And through this process of molecular distillation, we also are removing the contaminants. This process will separate the omega-3s not only from mercury and lead and PCBs and other contaminants that could be in there, it's also removing the cholesterol that's naturally present in the fish oil, and it's removing some of the other things in the fish oil that, while not necessarily harmful, you just don't need. So you can get the same amount of omega-3 in a much smaller capsule. And if you've ever looked at Omega Guard and compared it to some other products on the market, you'll probably notice that the amount of omega-3 that you get in that small capsule might be much more when you compare labels and you see somebody else's product. It's because they're not doing this process, most likely. And that means not only is the omega-3 less concentrated, but it might not be as clean. The other thing that we do at Shaklee, because we are concerned about the environment, because we want our products to always be clean, is we get our omega-3 from a certified sustainable fishery. We're using the small fish and making sure we're not taking too many, so they're not at the top of the food chain. Their oil is going to be cleaner to start with. These small fish replenish rapidly, and we make sure that we're not harming the environment. I talked yesterday about Phytocol. I'm so happy that we now have this product here in Malaysia. As I mentioned, I take it myself. You want to take it with meals. It is natural. It's gluten-free, vegetarian, halal. I think it's a great product for many people to take. Just remind you how it works quickly, that it's working in your GI tract, that cholesterol that's naturally present in your GI tract, either from your diet or because your body made it and put it there, is normally going to go across the intestinal wall and into your bloodstream. But when you have Phytocol there, it's going to block some of that absorption, and so the cholesterol will just pass harmlessly out of your body along with the plant sterols. It's a very simple mechanism. Again, for best results, you want to take this product twice a day with meals. I take it with breakfast and with dinner. Some people asked me yesterday after my talk how long they should wait if they want to have their blood tested after they've been taking Phytocol. That's a very good question, because what will happen, your cholesterol would start going down right away, but it takes a while. So if you want to go back to your doctor and be checked after you've been taking Phytocol, I would suggest waiting at least 6 weeks. Be on the product for at least 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. So go through a couple of bottles, take it every day, take it either immediately before the meal or during the meal, whatever helps you remember. One thing I can tell you, it's not going to help you if you don't take it, right? But if you take it regularly and give it 6 to 8 weeks, and then best thing to do would be to go in for a fasting blood sample. If it's non-fasting, they can measure your total cholesterol, and that'll be relatively accurate. But if you go in and you fasted overnight, and they draw your blood, you can get total cholesterol, LDL, that's the bad cholesterol, HDL, the good cholesterol, and triglycerides. And you might want to have them also look at your fasting blood glucose to see if you have any diabetes risk while you're at it. And while you're there, they could check your blood pressure. Now you have a lot of information. You have a lot of information to understand what your risks are and what you could do to lower your risk. So that's Phytocol. And now I want to talk about Vivix. Some of us, myself included, I don't really put Vivix in the heart health category in a direct sense, but it's there in an indirect way, right? Because Vivix is about healthy aging, and healthy aging includes the health of your cardiovascular system. Aging of the cardiovascular system is one of the big issues with old age, right? So Vivix is an amazing product. I've so much enjoyed being at Shaklee and reading about the research that's been done on Vivix, and we're continuing to do research on Vivix. We have some studies underway right now that I'm hoping I'll be able to talk about at Long Beach in a few months. And we're continuing to work to see if we can make Vivix even better than it is today. And I'm also excited that we're getting more and more patents on Vivix around the world. We've really got something here that nobody else has. It's a great testament to the science at Shaklee that we have this product. We recognize when we look around us that people seem to age at different rates. You'll see sometimes a 70 or 80-year-old who seems very, very young, or a 50-year-old who seems old. And why is that? What's the difference? Some of it clearly is genetic, but some of it is the wear and tear that we've put on our bodies with the various stresses that we go through. So I like to think about, there's the chronological age. There's the age that it would say based on what it says on your birth certificate or on your driver's license. How many years old are you in that chronological sense? But you also have a cellular age. You have this aging that is associated with the accumulated damage that conditions have done to you. The stress, UV radiation, contaminants in the environment, and the quality of your diet. All of these things are aging you. And so you can age faster or slower depending on these stresses upon your body. And we call that your cellular age. I had a chance to attend a talk by a research scientist who studies mechanisms of aging. And she made a very simple but interesting observation. There are diseases that we associate with aging, and cardiovascular disease is certainly one, dementia, osteoarthritis, loss of vision. Type 2 diabetes is usually associated with aging, happens more in older population. So there's a whole host of diseases that we associate with aging. And there's an interesting, simple but interesting fact that all of these diseases have a relatively low incidence before about the age of 50. You don't hear about a lot of people having heart attacks before the age of 50. There's some, or type 2 diabetes, there's some. Dementia, there's some, but not very much. And then at around age 50, the curves all start going up sharply where your risk of being diagnosed with these conditions goes up. It's an exponential increase for all of these conditions, and it starts happening around age 50. And these scientists looking at this pattern said, if all these different diseases are showing the same pattern, maybe it's because underlying them, there's one thing going on. There's one common mechanism that explains this rise. And what they believe that is cellular aging. Because that's the fundamental unit of our bodies, the individual cells. They are accumulating damage. The damage doesn't start when you turn 50, but that's the point at which it can tend to become serious enough that we recognize it as disease. The damage starts when you're born, or even before you're born. And it's accumulating all through your life, and it finally gets to a tipping point where there's a diagnosis. Make sense? That's what we think is going on. So, the wonderful thing is our bodies have all these mechanisms to prevent or repair damage. And we have been studying these mechanisms as we study Vivix and its ingredients. We've done laboratory studies, and this is a graph out of a clinical study. And we've looked at the different ways in which cells can be damaged, and then we've looked to see if the ingredients in Vivix would protect against those different mechanisms of damage. And what we've seen is yes it can. And when I say that we're continuing to study Vivix right now in the laboratory, we're looking at additional mechanisms whereby cells get damaged. So can Vivix either prevent the damage in the first place, or can Vivix help your body repair the damage? Those are interesting questions. In this clinical study, the challenge, the provocation, the cause of the damage was simply an unhealthy meal. It's simply a very unhealthy breakfast. Very unhealthy breakfast can cause inflammation, can cause oxidative stress on your cells. And so with one single serving of Vivix taken before an unhealthy meal, well, we had a control group. This is a randomized control study. So there was a group of subjects that got a placebo and then ate an unhealthy meal, and you can see that in that group, the measures of oxidative damage went up in response to the meal. In the Vivix group, the group that got the real thing and then had the unhealthy meal, the measures of oxidative damage actually went down. The Vivix completely blocked that damaging response to a bad meal. So that's a good example of what we're looking for when we say we want to slow aging. We want to try to maintain health and wellness. We want to block that kind of damage. And again, that would apply to the cardiovascular system as well as any other. Remember this from yesterday. This is what we want to avoid. This is the final stage. This is a heart attack. This is why prevention is the better way to go. You can recover from a heart attack, or you might not. It's like rolling the dice. Depends on what number comes up. But if you can prevent that heart attack in the first place, I think that's a better option, right? That's where we want to be. It's wonderful to be in this room and see and hear all the children, right? The children are the future of Malaysia. They're the future of the world. Those of us who are parents, and I'm a parent, I'm a very proud parent, or grandparents, or aunts and uncles, we want to be there to see these children grow up. We want to be there to guide them, to teach them what they need to know, to succeed in life. To do that, we have to look after our own health. We have to look after our own hearts. And then we can be there for them. And we can also be there for them by the example, not just what we say, but what we do. They will see if you are making the choices to look after your health, and they can learn from that. And that's an important thing too. They can see whether you take nutrition seriously by what you put on their plates as well as what you put on your own. And if we teach our children the importance of nutrition and lifestyle choices, they will reach their full potential. And if we are living that with them, we will be there to see and experience that with them. It's too high a price to pay to have a bad diet and miss seeing those children bloom. So that's why we want to think about this, and we want to be mindful in our diet and lifestyle decisions. So I want to come to a close by mentioning what I said yesterday. Prevention is really not complicated. There are four key things for you to think about. Start with a healthy diet. Move it in a healthy direction day by day. Try to make better choices. Find ways to get regular physical activity to protect not just your heart, but many of your systems from breaking down. Work to achieve an optimal weight and supplement wisely. If you do these four things, these four simple things, your chances of having a long and healthy life are improved greatly. I want to say it has been a great pleasure for me to be with you here this weekend. This is my first trip to Malaysia with Shaklee. Not my first trip to Malaysia, but my first with Shaklee. I look forward to coming here again. I hope that the next time I come, I will have time to see more of your amazing country, maybe go on a tour, talk to some smaller groups around Malaysia, hear what you're interested in. And I plan to be back next year. I've had many good conversations with you about other products that you might be interested in. I will be taking those back with me to the R&D group, and I look forward to being here next year with more exciting products like Phytocol ST. Thank you, and be well.
Okay, let's give a big hand for Dr. Bruce Daggy, and thank you very much for his support. Thank you.